Welcome, dear listeners, dear viewers, to this new episode for the Embodied Educator podcast. Today, I have a wonderful guest who's all about the body and especially with the dancing background. So I want to welcome my guest today, Hetty King. Hi, Hetty, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. But before we dive in, I would love to introduce you and to show your body of work with the world. So here we go. Hetty King is a native New Yorker, holds a collection of titles from BFA to MFA to MA. She's been a part of the New York City dance and performance world as a performer, a choreographer, a dance educator, a writer, and a scholar since graduating from the High School of Performing Arts in 1985. She is all but dissertation in the EDD Dance Education Program at Teachers College, Columbia University, where her research focuses on the possibilities of somatic pedagogy for early childhood dance education. Hetty's choreography has been presented in New York City and across Canada. And as a dancer, she worked in the companies of Ralph Lemon, Marta Renzi, Victoria Marx, Bill Young, and David Dorfman. She also performed with a wide variety of magical dancers like Alison Green to Irene Stamu, Lynn Snelling, and many more I can tell you. Read a full bio for all the details, I would say. And Hetty has been in the field of dance education since 2000. Since the magical 2000s. Yeah. She has served a wide range of populations from in-school, after-school programs for humans of all ages from preschool to senior citizens. She also has developed and taught pre-K-5 dance programs that focus on the creative process in both public and private schools. And for her impactful work, Hetty received the Sol Burns Award, complete tuition remission at NYU's Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, the Jacob K. Javits Fellowship in the Arts and Humanities, 3 Jerome Foundation Commission grants for choreography, and a US Mexico Fund for Culture grant from the Rockefeller Foundation and Arnold Foundation grant. So Hetty has been presented numerous titles, and she also presented many conferences like the NDEO as National Conference internationally at the DACI, which is the Dance and Child International, and at the Toronto Children's Theatre. And she's also a contributor to Dance Education and Practice and Contact Quarterly Unbound, and has reviewed books for Jody and the Journal of Somatic Dance. And as a student of the late Somatic movement pioneer Nancy Topf, Hetty nurtured a love of the somatic arts as they relate to dance, embodiment, and the education of the whole child. Hetty was certified by Nancy and completed her posthumous manuscript in June of 2022. Hetty was also the program director for the Dance Makers in the Schools program at Movement Research, one of the world's leading laboratories for the investigation of dance and movement-based forms. And currently, she is a full-time dance educator for grades 3K second till second at public school, 145K, the Magnet School for Leadership through Engineering in Bushwick, Brooklyn, where she lives with her husband, a theater technician at the Metropolitan Opera, and their 2 adopted daughters, together with the cat, Clyde, and their frog, Snowball. What a lovely collection of wonderful beings you have there. So that was a mouthful. Welcome, Hetty, for all the body of work. And then I still left a lot of details out, but gosh, yeah. So to start off with the first question, I'm curious, of all the lineage you hold, who's a very important teacher in your life that of how you show up, how you serve the world today? Who's influenced that for a big part?
Yeah. Well, I started dancing very early, so I have quite a few teachers that were very formative to me in different ways. I think about a dance teacher I had at the Joffrey School, Meredith Bayless, who was just incredible in the way she demonstrated technique and how she moved the class and in the way that she inspired me, even as it became clear that I wasn't going to have a career in ballet as a ballet dancer.
Mm.
Later on, when I did go to college for dance, essentially, I went to a conservatory. The program I was in at NYU was directed by Larry Rhodes, and he also was just an amazing teacher in the way that I guess one of the things that was so beautiful about him was his musicality. No class that you took with him was the same. There was always something he was unfolding for you,
Mhm.
even though I knew that personally, I don't think he was in the happiest time of his life being a director in that situation. He left and later went to Juilliard, which I think was maybe a more appropriate setting for him. And
Yeah.
of course, he's no longer with us. But again, also really championing me as somebody who was really serious about what I was doing, who came with everything to the dance class. And it was something I really wanted to do. It's where I wanted to be. Um, Later on, I would say that although he really is a choreographer, Ralph Lemon was a huge teacher for me. I spent a long time working with him as a dancer, and the ways that he worked with us as dancers, what he brought out of us as humans, it was not only formative. I mean, when I started working with him, I was 21, but it was just artistically incredible. And he's still a dear friend to this day, and I deeply admire what he does in the world.
Mhm.
And then, of course, there's Nancy Topf, who I met in the 1990s as when I was still dancing professionally, who became incredibly influential in my life and really kind of turned me in this whole direction that we now, now I can name as somatics. And, she was more than a teacher, she was also a friend. So,
Yeah.
yeah, even though there was a big difference in our ages.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. I think age and if you speak language of body, especially when you connect in, I would say as a dancer, I guess there's such a mutual connection and age. I have a lot of friends actually who are older and I feel like, yeah, I don't know.
It's a
Age,
beautiful thing. I mean, I do as well. Now I realize I have friends and I say, oh my goodness, that person is 20 years younger than me,
yeah,
but we're having this great connection. And it's usually through, like you're saying, through a really shared love of something, whether it's
yeah,
dance or
yeah,
teaching or a certain
yeah.
kind of practice, really gives you this common language that you can delve into. And
Mm,
it's wonderful.
yeah, yeah. No, that's so true. Yeah, my next question, and I think you already leaned into it with the variety of dancers you've been working with, because the iconic figures like Tricia Brown, Ralph Lemon, Nancy Topf, this lineage you carry. I always love the expression of the shoulders of the people who we stand on, the one who went before us. It's so important to name that. And I also really appreciate going through that in your bio as well to name them and bring the lineage forward. And I'm curious, how have those somatic and embodied, yeah, lineages influenced your teaching and the way you present yourself as a teacher today, especially, yeah, in your
Mm,
classroom?
mm. Well, it's interesting because my experience with Nancy Topf was it was so transformative to me as a dancer and as a performer and as somebody just whose body was how I express myself in my artistic form,
Mm,
that as I kind of left the practice of really being a dancer on a daily basis, going to classes, being part of rehearsals and choreography and that kind of thing, and really moved into teaching, um, I wasn't sure at first what to do with all of that. Um, and it oddly enough is kind of what led me to this whole dissertation process, which is where I am now, all this time forward, was really starting to question, well, where does all this somatic world live in my life as a teacher with young children? I didn't really intend to become a teacher with young children. I thought, like many dancers, that I was going to end up teaching in a university. That didn't come to pass. I ended up in a situation where, really kind of in a way to make a living, like many of us do, I I became a teaching artist, first with Lincoln Center Institute, and I started going into public schools in New York City. And even though I'm the product of a public school education in New York City, and even went, as you said, to High School of Performing Arts, which is a public high school in New York City, it hadn't really occurred to me that there was dance in public schools. Well, of course, my school was highly specialized. You had to audition to get in. It was not like a normal school. I mean, half of the day you were in your art form.
Yeah.
Here it was, you're in a regular school, but these kids have a dance class, or they have this residency where you come in and you um,
So
work
fun.
towards creating choreography with them, and then you take them on a trip to see a performance, and they get to learn about that particular artist. And it really kind of, I don't know, wowed me. I was like, oh, wait a second. This is kind of cool. I
Yeah.
didn't know about this. I didn't know about what I would now call, I wouldn't say I would now call, it's called dance education, dance as education. It wasn't something that was on my radar at all. And I just kept following that path. And before I knew it, I was really teaching all the time in these institutional settings, working with young children, and being guided by some pedagogical models that had already been created that allowed me to sort of, figure out how to do this, because I didn't know. I didn't go to school for it. Um, and it isn't like going in and just teaching a technique class, especially with young children. It's just a much more kind of democratic environment. And I really began to think, well, where does all this somatic lineage that I have live in my own pedagogy? Does it at all? Is anybody talking about it? Is there any place that I see it showing up, but it's not being named? What would it mean to think about it more explicitly? And how could I do that? Because my practice was as an adult, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
all the work that I did with Nancy, which was the most sort of formative somatic experience. And I was with her during a time when she was really trying to codify what she was doing, and she was starting the whole process of what would a teacher training be. And she certified myself and a few other students as sort of this first magical cohort, even though there wasn't really a training program yet. It was just all the time that we had spent with her. And during that time, I got my CMA. So I studied Laban movement analysis. And my project, because becoming a CMA is kind of like a master's degree, you do a thesis at the end. Um, my project was to look at Nancy's work through the lens of Laban movement analysis.
Mhm.
And how could I use that structure to unpack what she was doing? And yeah, so all of those things kept pointing me to the idea that it really wasn't being explicitly discussed as part of pedagogy for young children at all. Um, and that just became a big question for me. And
Yeah.
I wanted to spend time figuring out some answers. I don't know.
I wrote
Answer
actually
sounds really
down living
terrible,
the
but just like more
question.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're living the question. And
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, right. And almost that is such an embodied practice where yeah, you don't just search for the answer, but it starts with the question and then figuring that out more, which is interesting. And especially, I think, when you work with little children, where I don't think the answer always doesn't always matter that much either, because there's so much curiosity and there's so much spaciousness, so much knowledge and wisdom available. Yeah, so
I love that you say that because I was talking with my husband about this interview and I was saying, how when I think about my research process,
Mhm.
how it's a question, but the idea is not really to find an answer. It's actually what is the next question and how much I
Mm.
appreciate that because a lot of what I have had to step into as a dance educator, working in institutions, is that you start with an objective and then you're
Yeah,
supposed to show that you got to that objective, which is actually almost the opposite of what most of us do as artists and most of us do as somatic researchers, where we don't have the end in mind. That would be crazy. Um, so yeah, I mean, we can talk more about it as we go on, but yeah, I'm just happy to be in that process and have that to balance out the other things that I do on a daily
yeah,
basis.
yeah. It does maybe require to be able to hang out a lot in your right brain side where you don't always need to rationalize and have it in figures and certain systems, and because that's also why I think love the embodied educator, and this whole search of how can we look at education so much broader to step out that left brain side, which is always so prone to get the answer to the question and what's your hypotheses and how do you derive to this conclusion, etc. Yeah.
And to stand in that space with I don't know, like the presence that this is knowledge. There is knowledge in that process. We're unfolding it, we're unpacking it, we're discovering it. I can't always name it, but I know it's there. This idea that as we move, we are creating ideas and information. Um, so yeah, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So let's wind back just a moment because I think it's so interesting. You already mentioned her, Nancy Topf, that you lived through her passing
Yeah.
and worked with her unfinished manuscript, and you helped writing, finishing the book for her that she started, right? She specifically, I think you told me this, asked you to finish it.
Her husband did.
Oh, her husband did.
I don't think that was that she ever anticipated.
No,
She
no, but
didn't finish
yes,
it.
yeah, it was very sudden. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
No,
So,
no,
yeah,
go ahead.
no, my question would just be like, what was that process like for you, and both creatively and personally to finish off that book and been working with her so closely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, initially, I not long after her passing, her husband did give me all the bits and pieces of what the manuscript was, which was kind of overwhelming, just in that
yeah,
it was not particularly organized.
mm,
And she had been working with a writing partner,
yeah,
and I was able to meet with him and think about ways that I could approach continuing the process. But I also knew that I needed support, like who's going to publish the book. And I did my best at that time to, basically cold call people. Not in that world. And I couldn't get anyone interested in the book at the time.
mm,
And then I had to put it down. It just was too much with everything else in my own personal life. And the manuscript got passed to another student, Melinda Buckwalter, who was also one of those initial people who was certified by Nancy.
yeah.
And she had
Passing the
more,
torch.
yeah, she had more publishing experience.
Hmm.
And she actually took the first part of the book and published it through Contact Quarterly that she was working with. And it's like a 40-page, I think we call them chapbooks, like a little tiny book.
Ah,
And so that was the manuscript, but it was also a lot of other things. It included other sort of like reflections and conversations with some of her students. illustrations from some of the people who had worked with her. And then that was it. But it wasn't the whole book. And so she then sort of had, I hope I'm remembering it correctly. Basically was like, I can't finish it either. And it came back to me. And then a lot of time passed. And
And
then,
then COVID happened, didn't it?
well, it was before that, actually. It ended up getting worked on during COVID to a
Hmm.
great extent, but it was prior to that that I realized I was going to be the age that she was when she passed away.
Mm.
And I thought, oh my God, like this is a lot of time has elapsed, and I need to make this happen. Somehow it just like became like a raison d'être or something, like
Yeah,
I have to do this.
yeah.
And I was able through some other connections that I knew to present my idea to the University Press of Florida. And there were a number of editors there that were all interested in the book. Like suddenly it was like a thing.
Oh.
And uh, one of them made a pitch to me, not financially, but that's okay. And I ended up working with Mindy Aloff, who's this wonderful writer and dance historian who was really interested in the project, partly because, um, and it's so interesting, all the webs, but like Martha Eddy, who I'm sure anybody who's in the somatic community knows who she is, she had created this like diagram of some of the formative somatic practices that were things that you could study, codified,
Mhm.
not not to
Kind of
like
framework,
like
kind
what
of.
they say, put shade on people who don't have that, but just, like Alexander technique and body mind centering and these
Yeah.
kind of things. And she created this beautiful map of sort of like who was where, and
Hmm.
Nancy was on the map.
Mm.
And Mindy was very interested in that she was part of this lineage, and that I had also talked about how originally, when Nancy was first developing her work with a group of dancers, um, she called it release work.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And this was about around a time when, the aesthetics in the postmodern dance world of New York, which is what I know, although it's a little older than me, like it kind of preceded me a little bit, was the aesthetics were changing. And, choreographers like Trisha Brown in particular were really introducing this very kind of loose and soft and easy in the limbs movement, and this idea of release technique. Where did it come from?
Yeah.
And so Mindy was very interested in that part of Nancy and her place in sort of history at this point,
Yeah.
because enough time had passed that now it really was like this, it was history, So she encouraged me to write like expository information about myself and about Nancy, and just she was amazing
Mm.
in really helping me to shape the proposal that then went to the press, that they accepted. And then the process began in earnest of, okay, now I know that all the work that I'm going to do is going to result in having
I was just about to ask.
the
Sure.
book.
The
And
book. Yeah.
I have a copy on my desk, not because of this, ironically, but because I'm sending it to a friend.
Oh,
Um, but yeah, so it was a lot getting to there, but then then I had like this the sort of like the structure of how it was going to be supported. And then then it was like 2 years of just figuring out how to organize all the different pieces
mm.
I had.
Yeah.
Um,
Leaving all these questions and then putting them into structures.
yeah, I did a lot of I found that color was my friend.
Oh, yeah?
I was like, this section is green and this section is purple and this is blue, and oh, this belongs in the blue section, and it helped me like keep everything organized. Because the book is the bulk of the book. What really came from Nancy was written in a it is written in a form of a dialogue, like almost like a Socratic dialogue. So
Mm,
there's the teacher, there's the student who is italico and like written in italics, right? And
yeah.
then there's the different parts of the body that become personified and speak. Like the jaw wakes up and says, "Hey, I'm the jaw, and this is what I do." And there's a whole conversation between these things, between the,
That's
it's so
that's
cool, right?
Can I be very bold and totally surprise you with this question? Can we experience that just for a moment? Is that something doable? Like, what does it mean when the jaw speaks? Is it,
Well, I mean, I could open up the book and find something from it. I can't
yeah, can
go
we
off
do
the
that?
top of
That
my
does
head,
it?
but let's see. So she even starts at the very beginning by saying, "Knock, knock. Hi, Italica, come on in. I've got somebody I want you to meet." Well, not exactly a somebody, but a good friend of mine nonetheless, and he's standing right over there. And then in italics, "Oh, pleased to meet you. I've never met a skeleton before. I must admit, though, Nancy, this is a little weird." And who she's talking about is her skeleton, who's actually in the other room. Sorry, I could have brought him in, but he lives with me now. Lombardo was her skeleton. And
Everybody needs a skeleton. I love
everybody
it.
needs a skeleton, right?
Yes, yes.
And so this continues like this. And then she introduces him, and then Lombardo speaks.
Yeah,
And then it continues through all these different parts of the body. And so that was the coloring. Like this
yeah.
is the pelvis, this is the spine, this is the uh, s-
Fibula or the
clavicle and
chest.
scapula. Yeah,
Yeah,
the different. And then she also had things that were not so much specific, like skeletal landmarks, but images that connected to ways that she wanted you to think about embodying, like these idea of domes. Like there's the dome of the roof of
yeah,
your mouth, and there's the dome of your diaphragm, and there's the dome of your pelvic floor, and these all stack within your body. And
yeah.
how do these domes speak to you? Um, so there are ideas like that. And so they all come to life or they become animate in a way and they have these conversations. And it's very lighthearted. And Nancy, of course, it's her voice as the teacher. And you can really hear how just always delighted she is with this information. It's never old to her, it's always new and it's always
Mm.
encouraging. Like, I think that was something that really drew me to her. You know, dance can be pretty harsh.
Yes,
And I'd
yeah.
certainly been through a lot of almost punitive kind of training experiences. And this was just the opposite, but it wasn't because there was a lack of integrity. There was so much integrity and so much to learn and so much,
Mhm.
yeah. So that, yeah, then that was my job became really clarifying the voice that was speaking and to make sure there was a lot of redundancy in what Nancy left behind. And so, oh, she said that 5 times, I'm going to say it once, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And things that I eventually had to leave out just because they were so incomplete. I couldn't include them. And that was hard. But that was also the process. When you work with an academic press, you go through peer review. So I had to go through 2 processes of peer review and then an editorial review
Yeah.
before, it kind of went to becoming galleys and the book kind of coming together. So I had a lot of really good feedback that way. And that was really from the first round of peer reviews, this just
No.
can't
It
stay.
must be exciting and also scary at the same time when you get peer reviewed, whereas other people really zoom in on it is your work. I mean, although Nancy Topf is behind, it's also your work. It's
Yeah.
it's it's like this co-working setting.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
they,
that's where, ultimately Mindy said, we have to include you more prominently. And so it was decided that it would be um, credited as Nancy Topf with Hetty King.
oh
So it's
yeah,
like her book, but it's really with me because I I birthed it into the space.
Yeah, yeah. You did gave it the whole landing.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So I feel like just a breather to because that's deep work. And then we haven't even gotten to the classroom yet, where you also have your research that you do and from a somatic lineage and where you're living the questions, where you're really working with children. Um, I'm like, as young as 3, I think, isn't it?
I do work with children as young as 3, but specifically for the research like question that I developed through the
Yeah,
doctoral process and that became has become my sort of like the dissertation question.
yeah.
I'm working with children who are 4 to 5 years old, so just
Okay.
slightly older, like
Yeah, yeah.
pre-K going into here we call it kindergarten in when kids are 5. So
Okay.
kids who are anywhere between that. But I do in my professional, like where I work in my school, I do work with 3-year-olds. So
Mm.
yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Hi there, educator. A tiny break to share a new program that I have coming up. Before the new academic year sweeps you off your feet, what if you gave yourself 3 days to land? Join me August 22 to 24 for Release, Resource, Revive, a 3-day online at-home retreat to help you create your own sanctuary for rest. We'll slow down, restore your nervous system, and lay the foundation for a more sustainable year of teaching, leading, and living. It's live, it's gentle, and it's made for real humans. Curious? Go to www.theembodiededucator.nl/online retreat. I'd love to welcome you. And now let's get back to my conversation with dear Hetty. In your process of living the question, researching what can somatic do in your classroom,
Mhm.
can you, yeah, elaborate on those movement adventures? What kind of stories come out of that? What situations? How does it live in the classroom?
Yeah, well, I guess I was saying this to you earlier, like it's not like I have this whole pedagogy that I've
No,
developed and it's all formed. These were
no,
just questions, and
yeah.
yes, I've been teaching children for a long time, but I wanted to see if I could kind of explicitly focus on a somatic approach with little children and see
Mm-hmm.
what would happen. And one of the things that I have found successful in the classroom with little children is stories and sort of taking them through activities as they are stories. And, it's so funny because I didn't even think about this at first, but then I realized, in these movement adventures, a lot of what happens is that these ideas become personified just the way they do in Nancy's book. So there's like
Mm.
or maybe almost like an unconscious connection to that, which I think is really beautiful. But I I'm gonna just step back for just a second because I do
Mm-hmm.
want to credit somebody who I worked with prior to really beginning to create these, which is Susan Bauer.
Mm.
So as I was beginning my doctoral work and really looking into who might also have asked these questions, I came across Susan Bauer and her book, The Embodied Teen.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate, this is just before COVID, to spend some time with her in California where she was living at the time. And then because of COVID, do quite a bit of work with her online. Um, and I think I've clocked hundreds of hours with her at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the process of also creating a teacher certification program. I think she's still working on that. You've
Yeah.
spoken to her recently, so you might know more than me.
Yeah,
But
she
I
is. Yeah.
did a whole module with her, and the end of that was to take her ideas and work with children. But because her pedagogy is specifically for kind of teens and young adults, I at
Yeah.
the time had access through the job I was doing to two groups of eighth graders. So those kids are like 13 years old, 14.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I basically taught her pedagogy as best as I could. And she had very specific lessons that she wanted us to do. So that got my feet wet in a way, in terms of like how do I do this explicitly, not maybe embedded into other things that I'm doing in the classroom.
Yeah.
And so then I had to develop a way to gather data from little children. And the idea of movement adventures came kind of naturally. Like, I'm going to tell a story, and the children are going to engage with me, and through that, come into a dialogue with some aspect of themselves, whether it's a skeletal aspect or whether it's more of a conceptual like aspect. So I just started writing these adventures. Started with one about the feet, because starting with the idea of your feet on the earth, and that's your grounding. And the story is called like Two Big Feet Meet the Earth. I think I'd have to quote myself, something like that. And in
Sounds
it,
really good.
yeah, in it, the kids approach their feet, literally like, hi, foot, and touch their foot and wake up their foot and ask their foot how it's
Realistic
feeling.
death?
And we draw our feet, and then we dance, using our feet,
Yeah.
and stop and notice how our feet are feeling, and then come back to drawing our feet again.
Yeah.
And how do the feet come? How do they show up now?
Hmm.
And then from that, I added the head and the feet, like this whole idea of tonic function, but I don't say that to them. Um, and I wanted to do more than eight, but eight became what I had. Originally I had four, and then it became eight. And so some of the adventures are about breathing and the different ways that breathing shows up. And in that story, different animals come into a garden and they breathe in different ways. And so we experience that. But then we also think about how our own body breathes, and drawing your breath, following your breath, coming back to, uh, oh, like I had little tiny little pinwheels and we would blow on them. And how can we direct our breath in different ways?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, There were stories about the skeleton, and can you dance how your bones are? What do you know? But also starting out in a lot of ways, I hope I'm not rambling too much, with the questions that Susan would ask, like, what is a foot? And how does your foot feel? You so they're very abstract, which for kids can be really like, that's a challenge. They're pretty concrete thinkers. Um, but surprisingly enough, they went along with me on these adventures.
Yeah.
And I did the first four adventures with children at a little private preschool I was working at, and I had a lot of support there, and that was wonderful. I had a very small group of children, a
Hmm.
lot of other teachers with me who were really helpful. And I was able to begin to see how that manifested in the classroom. And then I did that project again with the same four movement adventures, but now I was kind of coming back to them, just the way anybody does, like what, and editing them, like what worked, what didn't,
Yeah,
what did I
of
say
course.
differently. That was another thing I really got from Susan, was really, really being intentional about the language that you use.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a hard one,
Can you give an
especially,
example of that?
oh my goodness, I wish I could, but I think even thinking about the way you ask somebody to approach something, say,
Hmm.
I'm going to invite you to do this,
Yeah.
or I suggest, or I'm thinking about this, what are you thinking?
Hmm.
Not telling them,
Hmm.
not letting them know that you already have an idea of what you want them to do, but finding a way to engage them, meaning the children, in listening to themselves, right? So
Yeah.
that's the best example I could give of that in the moment. I'm sorry. I'd have
No,
to
it's
be.
okay. Don't apologize. But I get, but I think
Yeah.
that's also that is a level of working somatically, right? Where you really allow time, space, experience as much through your own lens and not with any steering, labeling, judging opinion. And that is actually already such a challenge. I've noticed that when we were checking in, I started before we pressed record, and I noticed, oh yeah. I can sometimes be very directive. I'll bring your attention to your feet. It's like, I invite you to, instead of being very direct. Because
Yeah.
as educators, we can be when we know we want this or that to be done, get done.
Mhm. Well, it's very disorienting because I think that so much culturally, that's where the world we live in.
Yeah.
That, that if you're not being that directive, that maybe there's something wrong with you, or you don't know what you're doing, or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so
Yeah.
then I was able to do the project again, but this time with my students in the public school where I work now,
Hmm.
which was really my dream to be able to have it be in a public school setting where you get like 18 kids in a pre-K class, not
Is
eight.
that the difference? Because what is the difference between the setting you're in now? Can you describe so we?
Yeah. Well, most private schools here in the United States are selective in some way. Um, and they can be. They can choose to accept you or not. They can ask you to leave if they want. Um, that's a big, like right off the bat,
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot
Less
of,
students in
yeah, I would say that's
numbers.
kind of one of the biggest differences. And in the, hmm, and also in the difference between the this particular private preschool setting and then the public one, just the sheer number of children and the ratio of children to teacher. I
Yeah.
mean, I had, I think, 8 kids and there were 4 adults.
Whoa, that's insane.
It's
Yeah.
insane. And
Yeah.
now I have 18 children and it's me. And there's an educational assistant in the classroom, but their role is often dimly defined, especially when they come to like a dance class. And it's really up to me to build rapport with them and some kind of expectation. But often I'm also really want to allow space for what makes them comfortable
Yeah.
because I don't want them to feel like the children are getting out of control or becoming something too chaotic or something that they don't approve of because then we're battling each other. So there's that. But I was able to do it and I lucked out. I had an educational assistant. She actually retired the year after that. So too bad, but she was so supportive and really went with the flow of what I was doing.
Yeah.
And part of the protocol was to have, I did it kind of as like an ethnographer would. So instead of videotaping the children as my main way of then me coming back and looking, I have someone in the room who's taking uh, notes, like ethnographic notes, like this is what I see, like um, not not judgmental, like anecdotal. There was
Hmm.
space for her to write things that she thought or felt, but it was really like last thought. It was really, and the person who came and did that for me was a student in the anthropology and education program at Teachers College.
Hmm.
And she also had her own like somatic background. It was like
Interesting.
magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she she really brought something out of the project that I am so grateful for, where she really began to she wanted me to accept. At first, I was like, no, 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 it's not about me. It's just about the kids. And she was like, that's crazy. You're in the room. It's about you as much as it is about them.
Yeah.
And it's about you and how you're interacting with the children.
Relationship, right? Yeah.
Which, of course, that sounds obvious. But to me, I was thinking, oh, I'm stepping back and we're just noticing the children. The children are in response to me. So silly, right? But
It's
that's
also, I think, the character of, maybe as an educator, we it is all about them. It's maybe the way a lot of us think, especially the ones who really care and work hard.
oh, thank you. Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
forget maybe that we actually are holding the space.
We are holding the space.
We are.
Yeah. And
And
actually, these are some of the, as you move through a doctoral process, the whole research process becomes like, well, what are your findings? And as very, very preliminary, because I'm still in the analytical phase and writing, that some of I have three things that I'm considering as my findings for the moment, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it will stick. And one of them is the person in the room counts,
Yeah.
who the teacher is, what their experience is, have they lived what they're teaching? And that was, also something that Susan Bauer said as one of her principles. You must teach from an embodied practice.
Yeah.
And, this this research I hope can give, that kind of like academic validity to that
Mm-hmm.
premise. I really found that huge as I'm going on. So
Yeah.
now I lost my train of thought, but there was
That
something
was, you
else.
were pointing out the the three, yeah,
Oh, the three,
three,
yeah. So
yeah.
the other is, and it's connected to who's in the room, but it was big and it became really pronounced in like the major project that I did to gather data for my dissertation, where I did 8 lessons, not just 4. And I had a group of children that were kind of gathered together for me, because I couldn't really do it in a classroom. And it became so clear over and over how important building community is.
Mm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
some people call it like the space or a safe space. I don't really always know what that means, but
Brave space.
right. But, these are children. And there's also this whole idea of what is a community of practice and how do
Yeah.
you step into that?
Yeah.
And there's some amazing scholarship on that. But I found that I have to create the community to practice, and then that becomes the community of practice that we're constantly co-generating. And how cool
Mm-hmm.
is
It's fantastic. That
that? It's
is,
so cool, right? So
yes.
that's one of my findings.
Yeah.
And then the last one is really like about the children's learning, like what's the student learning? And I think you kind of hit it on the head at the beginning when you said like maybe there is no like explicit like I learned this, but it's that I learned how to be in this process.
Mm-hmm.
I learned how to be in this place with myself, with other children, with the teacher, and that becomes part of who I am in the world.
Yeah.
So I really like that.
I
You
love
know.
that.
And these kids who I worked with on this, who worked with me through these 8 classes, it's been it's been so amazing going and looking at the data that I collected from them because we did a lot of drawing, we made sculptures.
What do
Um,
you see in those drawings and sculptures? Can you elaborate, like to give a sense of what's processing for them?
I see them. I see them, figuring out how to answer a question that I asked that maybe doesn't even make sense.
No, like what is your foot like? And then
Yeah. Um, there was one that really I picked 3 children.
yeah.
I'm doing sort of more extended narratives on them, and I've come maybe 90% through one of them. And something that came up that I can cite as an example was really funny was um, I wanted them to, experience this head as light and foot as grounded. So the idea that you could put a crayon on your head and you could draw on the ceiling as you're dancing, right? That's
Mm.
totally conceptual, like for a
Yeah.
4-year-old. And then, okay, so we do this whole activity of dancing, and then, okay, now draw with your real crayon on a piece of paper what you did. Well, that was really hard.
Yeah,
Like,
that
who am
must
I?
be.
What am I asking? That's insane. But the children tried. They all tried. They all did something. They're
That's
in
already
on
the learning,
stage.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this one little girl, she drew like a dot, and she drew a line up and a big line across and a line down. And it was clear, like, okay, this is where I went. She drew it. And then I went to ask her about it. Tell me about what your drawing is. And she said, I stayed in one place. That was her comment or her reflection. And I thought, okay. And I wrote it down on her paper. But of course, what she drew doesn't show that.
No.
So then I had all these questions like, did she draw that because that really happened? Did she? I just had so many questions about that, like space between those two things. And it was just really beautiful. And I have some more writing to do about it, but
Well,
um,
it's fascinating because it remembers me again of the moment where we were connecting together before we pushed record. And we did also a little bit of the somatic orienting, just, extending out into this space. And I'm sitting cross-legged on a chair that has a little bit of a backrest. Warriors. And I felt, and I think that's the power of somatic work, because I'm sitting still. If somebody would be noticing me, I would be not moving. But inside, I was growing taller, but at the same time, um, extending out. I felt like weightless, but big at the same time inside while we were connecting somatically over the world. And I think maybe she did hit it somewhere, as in, that was her experience. And that is so cool.
and in
Because
that context, I didn't have to say to her, "Oh no, sweetie, you did go somewhere. It's right on that page."
exactly,
I
it's
just
not the.
listened and I wrote down what she said,
Mhm.
and that's that was it. But it was a lot.
Yeah.
Really cool.
That is awesome. How do the children respond to one another? Do they also, or is this they're there together, but they each go their own route, or do they also observe and spot like irregularities of each other, and how do they respond?
Kids are always watching each other. I mean,
Yeah.
they really are. Although I am noticing as I'm going through my data that in certain things were really ignored by children,
Hmm.
things that you would think would really draw them in, and other things would draw them in, and then they would let it go.
Hmm.
Um, there were times when one we did a lot of drawing
Hmm.
prompts, like beginning and ending after the sort of the adventures. Like a child would want to draw and color in a rainbow wherever they were coloring, and so then lots of kids would do it also.
Yeah.
But then I thought, they also do that in their classroom. They're all, I get that when I ask children to color. They all want to make rainbows and hearts and flowers. And where does that come from? I don't know. So they did follow each other, but as it went on, they really, mm, like what they created was very much of their own. Like
Mm.
the three children who I'm kind of focusing on, the very last drawing that each of them created is completely different from the others and very, to me, like illustrative of their experience, like who they are and how they experienced it, you know, um, and their experiences couldn't be more different, especially there were two boys and I mean two girls and one boy, especially the boy from the two girls, like they just couldn't be more different in what was expressed at the end. So they were really doing their own thing. Yeah.
It's wonderful because
Oh, I don't hear you.
it's my microphone.
Oh, now I hear
Yeah,
you.
it is
Yep.
on. Okay, okay. It is interesting because I think this is I would say a tough, but a very abstract and interesting process to develop, to go through, to research, and to bring forth, because uh, the minds and their worlds are so different still from the way we work with the information we extract when you do research. And I think you're very brave and very curious at that. And I think that mindset of living the question is, yeah, also
Mm.
leaving space to not just put it into specific corners. That's also why I'm not pushing towards like giving specific examples all the time, because yeah, I think it must be a challenge as well.
Well, it's important, I think. I mean, that's part of my job
Yeah,
right now is to be able to illustrate the idea with examples and with,
yeah.
but um, I also have the data now, which is I have all the things that the observer wrote, all the notes, which includes like direct quotes of kids saying things. I have the drawings they created, the sculptures they created. I have then as much as I could, it's called stimulated recall, where you go and say, well, what is this? What did you create? Or how
Yeah.
was your experience with this? And I have those comments from them. They're not like reams and reams of things, but it's plenty. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then I've just been kind of looking at those things in different ways. So, you know, there's a lot of data that I can look at and then
Mm.
figure out, I'm trying to figure out how to connect it so that it
Yeah.
illustrates the idea and reminding myself I want to speak to someone who has no idea what I'm talking about and have them understand it,
Yeah.
or not what I'm talking about, but who has never thought of this before,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? What is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
So,
Mm. Beautiful. I feel like asking you, is there any way of a practice that we can experience a
mm.
moment of what you do? And can I turn on the light while you take a moment to think
Oh,
about
sure.
that? Because it's getting a little dark, I see.
Okay.
A little bit of light. And I thought, where's my book? So I can also, the light is not perfect, but it will have to do.
Oh, well, this isn't something from the book. I was thinking about what I could share
Yeah,
and
no. I was just
yeah.
thinking, but it's underneath my laptop. I wanted to just
Oh, yeah.
be like, because we mentioned it before, and she was also on the summit, and actually Susan Bauer got us connected. So that's,
Yes.
I felt like mentioning that one.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, she's very inspiring to me. So,
Yeah.
I was just thinking about like, because people often ask me, how do you do, as I do relaxation with the children.
Mm.
A lot of my colleagues do that as part of their practice, and I don't know what they do necessarily. I know a lot of people do kind of like guided meditations, but
Hmm.
and I think those have their place for sure, but I also want to provide an opportunity for children to not keep hearing someone else's voice. So one of the things that I do is at the end of our class, I invite them to lie down, like all the way, lie down
Hmm.
on the floor.
Yeah.
And at first, that's for some of them, like, really, you're gonna let us do that? But they soon get quite used to it.
Yeah.
And I tell them that there's no place to go and there's nothing to do. They can just breathe. And I want them to try to be so quiet that they can hear their heartbeat. And then I try to be really quiet because I want to give them a moment to do that.
Mm.
And it's not very long.
I
And
was
then I
just about to
ask
ask how
them
long.
seconds, really, honestly, especially for little ones. Um, and I have introduced something, especially with the littler children, where I'll offer them Um, I have a whole bin of weighted animals, little like
Hmm.
stuffed animals, but they have a weight to them.
Yeah,
And I invite them to hold it, to kind of give them a, say you
like
could
on
put
top
it,
of them, like a
yeah,
weight,
you could
right?
put it on your belly, you could put it on your
Ah,
chest, but you could also
yes.
just hug it.
Yeah.
And whatever you're thinking, you can tell the animal.
Hmm.
Then
Mm.
if you want to tell me or the class, I give kids a moment to do that if they want. And the other day, actually, it was funny. I said that at the end of the class, and nobody wanted to share. And I thought, perfect. That's great.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to say. They're keeping it for themselves. That's great. And I don't do that every time, but that is a practice. And then, I tell them like that the animal is a way for them to like share their kindness, because a lot of times they take the animal, they want to throw it and they twist it around and do all kinds of
Hmm.
stuff with it.
Hmm.
No, we're not going to do that with these animals. We're gonna be hug them, we're going to talk to them, maybe we rock them. I did a whole thing with them where they created little like hammocks with scarves, and they
Ah,
just want to keep
sway,
doing it. Yeah, and they swayed the animals, and then they would do it together. They would together, and then
sway
they would put
both.
3 or 4 of them in, and can you go slower? Can you
Mm.
rock them and take them to another place in the room? And then I have some beautiful pictures of them, like all the animals lying on the floor under a blanket where they were like put them all to rest, and so they're teaching them what they need to teach themselves also. So that's my best example. I don't know.
That's wonderful, but that's so touching. Yeah.
It's sweet. Yeah. I
Yeah.
know I had one teacher say when I started bringing the animals out, she said, "Oh, they're never going to give them back to you." I said, "Oh, yeah, they will. They'll give them back. Don't worry." Of course they do. Because also they know like if you don't give it back, it won't be there when you come back next time, you
Right?
know? And if this time you got the bear and you really wanted the frog, well, next time the frog will be here. So
If you give it back the bear,
if you give
then
it back, if you put it back,
yeah.
yeah.
So
And I also
I
ask
also
to
hear,
thank them, like say thank you,
yeah.
put it in the bin.
And it also allows for a world where there is a support for them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're
Even
not
though if
cast
they,
out.
yeah, even though, if they don't experience support in their other systems, in their families or whatever,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful way of showing that there is a support somewhere that is resourcing, that's supportive for you and listening.
Yeah.
So important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it sounds like you do also a lot of repetition. So they like it becomes a ritual sometimes, a
I
little
try to
bit.
have some rituals, yeah, especially with how things begin and how they end.
Yeah.
In the meat of the sandwich, it's going to change, but the way
Yeah.
we start and the way we end is pretty similar.
Is
And
it?
when I change it, a lot of times kids will notice, hey, aren't we going to do that thing? And I was like, oh, yeah, well, today we won't, but we'll come back to it. I
Yeah.
don't want them to get too like,
Fixed on it either, but
yeah, kids also thrive on like, what am I thinking? Like the novel,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Well, on one hand, I think a little bit of the structure, so they sometimes they can lean into something,
Mhm.
and then the novel to keep on.
Yeah, it's like, whoop, oh, hey,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
wake up.
exactly. To keep on growing.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what I'm what I'm thinking of is all the educators that are listening, and not so much as in a practice, but what is for you the most important thing, tool, moment for you as the educator to do this work in the room? What serves you best to show up embodied, and what what advice could you bring from that to other educators if they listen into our conversation and think, oh, I want to bring more of this. I want to explore from
Mm.
this, more somatic lineage and living the question and trying to allow a little bit more of the other world and the embodied anatomy, because that was very much part of the work you showed, and that's also coming from your work with Susan Bauer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a big question. Um,
Right.
yeah, yeah, no. I mean, I think you have to let your own curiosity guide you and your own lineage guide
Mhm,
you. I mean, that was
mhm.
another thing that was also really wonderful working with Susan, was her really saying you need to know what your somatic lineage is. Where do you sit within this field of practice? Because it is a field, it's not a dot. And, um, you know, do
Like
I,
it's a web.
it's a
It's,
web, but
yeah.
my lineage is like one strand of the web. I've
Yeah.
crossed it a few times a little bit, but it's really stayed very much within this strand. And,
Hmm.
I mean, Susan has said that to me as well, like, yes, I am influenced by body mind centering, but that's not all that I do. It's like, so you're taking in who you are and figuring out how do you want that to show up in the classroom.
Yeah.
I think that's the best thing I could say, and it doesn't have to be um like my question that I wanted to explore in my dissertation brought me to this idea of, can I do this explicitly? But I don't think that's the end goal necessarily, because I'm not going to always be able to do that or want to do it or need to do it. But it can inform every other way that I might approach anything, from teaching technique to developing choreography to how I'm showing up in the classroom. So, yeah, I think you have
Mm.
to stay active in your own practice too, whatever that is. For me now, it's pretty academic. Um, I don't get to do as much physical practice as I would like to, but
Do
there
you
will
still
be times
dance?
and it will come back. I'm not worried.
Mm.
You know, I find moments that are small and take them, but you know, as one of my kids says, it's the lying down on the floor time, mommy. Because that's really good. I said, yeah, I know. I mean,
Cool.
one of my own children, when I say like kids, yeah. She told me that the other day. I just died laughing.
Oh, you should remember that quote.
It's great. It's great.
But
Yeah.
it is interesting, isn't it? Because the lying down on the floor, actually getting horizontal changes the whole process of the body. And that's actually one of my tips as well, what I share a lot. And I love constructive rest. And I love it because Susan Bauer also works with that in the book. And I actually know it from my lineage in Pilates,
Yeah.
where constructive rest is just a really good position to let the muscles and all the work, especially when the psoas is going crazy,
Yeah.
to let it
Well, that
settle.
was my process when I first started working with Nancy. I was dancing in a company that was doing a lot of like shows in schools.
Yeah,
Ironically, we were going and being the performance and having to perform in all these crazy venues. And I was a little bit injured at the time, or I was trying to figure out about an injury.
yeah,
And I just would go into constructive rest,
yeah.
and I would work through these images and patterns and breathing that I was learning with Nancy. And that became my warm up for like a year,
Wow.
from somebody who was like, much more athletic about my warm up.
All these stretches and yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool. So,
Mm-hmm. It is powerful. It's a good power move. Mm.
yeah, it's a good power move.
To actually lie down. No, yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. So for me, and let's check in with you. I feel like also with the constructive rest, like the circle is round as in to the topics I wanted to, to
Yeah.
talk with you about. Is there anything you feel you want to add to what we already said?
No, I don't think so.
No?
Mm, yeah. I think the only thing I would say is I don't really have answers. I just have a lot of good questions.
Yeah, but living that question, living the questions, it's a good perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that, yeah. The Art of a Beautiful Question.
Yeah.
There's a book on that. I don't
Oh,
know the
cool.
title. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll look it
I
up for
mean,
the
in the
show
line
notes.
of questions that you sent me, I think at the very end, you said something about like, what would you want people to know about you when you're gone or afterwards? And I thought, oh God, I don't know. And my husband actually, I was talking to him about it, and he said, you just want people to know that you cared. And I said, that's true.
Yeah.
It really is true. I just want people to know that I cared about little children and their learning and, how we're placing the body within education.
Mm.
It's, you know, there's
Putting
a,
it at the center of our care, maybe to
that would be
care for
nice.
our bodies.
That would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah. To honor our bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I came up with this idea of being personally literate as like a way to sort of counter this like other kinds of literacy. So that's, and I had one of my teachers at Teachers College says, you just keep saying that, Hetty, and it will be yours. So I'm going to keep saying it. I'm
Oh,
going to keep
that's
writing it
cool.
down. So that's,
I've been working with body literate, but this is personally literate. Is like, can you just say one thing about that, like to
well,
explain?
just that I feel like for me, you know, the process of bringing a somatic process into my life taught me about myself. Yes, I'm a dancer. Yes, I was a dancer. Yes, I'm a teacher and I teach dance. But I also think we're learning about ourselves in
Yeah.
that process.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of conversation about like social emotional learning and all these names we give things. And I just think those are wonderful. But, you know, yeah,
Hmm.
just and that is an iterative, like it's always ongoing. It doesn't stop, you know. So
Yeah, it's evolving.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Let that be part of your journey of writing and this research, whatever
Yeah. It's
comes out
the
of that. But
Mhm.
should be wonderful. Lovely. Okay, so if people want to find you, where can they find you if they want to talk?
Oh, I have a website, hettyking.com.
Okay.
I thought about like building like a mailing list, but then I don't really have anything to send out because I don't teach workshops right now. I teach all day, every day in a public school, so that's where I am.
You care. You teach where there is.
I teach, yeah, it's a job also, I support myself and my family, so there's that. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm pretty sure there's that if you go on the website, you can, that my email is there, I think. I'm not sure, but yeah, there's that. So,
Perfect.
yeah.
All right. Well, then let's wrap it up so you can get back to that lovely family of yours with the frog and the cat. I always remember the tiny details.
It's so funny. I know.
Yeah.
I wish the cat would come into the frame, but he doesn't.
Yeah. There's only two
His
stuffed
heart
animals
is on the
watching.
bed. See that?
Oh,
Wait, I'm gonna put my finger there.
say,
That's the cat.
hi there. Oh,
He's in a
nice.
little, my kids call him cinnamon roll. They sleep swirled up. Looks like a cinnamon roll.
Funny. All right, I'm gonna go wave to the audience and say bye-bye and call it a day. Thank you, Hetty, so much for
You're
sharing.
welcome. Thank you.
Awesome you stayed till the end. And for more awesomeness, please share this episode with a fellow educator who might benefit from this. And for even more awesomeness, we would love a review or stars in your favorite podcast app. And a little donation means the world to help more educators in the world beat overwhelm and bring more balance and aliveness to their classroom, teacher room, and living room. Thank you for being here and sharing more embodied sparks in education.